the bitter toast. The champagne tasted like vinegar on Natasha Reed's tongue, though she knew it was probably worth more than her monthly rent. She stood at the edge of the Riverside Estate's marble terrace, watching the sun cast golden streaks across the manicured gardens where Brandon Pierce was about to marry Tiffany Monroe. The same Brandon who had proposed to her on a rainy Tuesday, then rescinded everything 6 months later with a text message that began with, "I've been thinking." The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, thick cardstock with embossed lettering that screamed wealth and refinement. Natasha's first instinct had been to burn it. Her second was to show up looking absolutely devastating. She'd chosen a midnight blue dress that made her green eyes luminous, swept her auburn hair into an elegant twist, and painted her lips the color of confidence she didn't quite feel. Inside the grand ballroom, 200 guests mingled beneath chandeliers that dripped with crystals. Natasha clutched her champagne flute and searched for her assigned table, praying she wouldn't be seated near anyone who'd witnessed the spectacular implosion of her relationship. When she finally found her name card, her stomach dropped. Table 18, the last table, the forgotten table. She was seated with Brandon's elderly great-aunt, who was hard of hearing, a distant cousin from Australia who knew no one, and 5 empty chairs that would likely remain that way all evening. The message was unmistakable. She was here because etiquette demanded it, not because anyone wanted her presence. Natasha sank into her chair and watched the room fill with laughter and animated conversation. Former mutual friends walked past without making eye contact, their discomfort palpable. She'd become a ghost, haunting the periphery of a life that had once included her. When Brandon had left, their entire social circle had chosen sides, and she'd lost spectacularly. The ceremony began with a string quartet playing something achingly beautiful. Tiffany floated down the aisle in a gown that probably cost more than Natasha's car, all silk and lace and inherited pearls. She was objectively stunning, with honey blonde hair and the kind of delicate features that belonged on magazine covers. Brandon's face when he saw her was radiant, transformed by a joy that made Natasha's chest ache with memories of when he'd once looked at her that way. The vows were traditional, their voices carrying across the hushed assembly. Natasha forced herself to watch, to bear witness to this final severing of what they'd once been. When the officiant pronounced them married and Brandon kissed his bride, applause erupted around her. Natasha clapped mechanically, each strike of her palms together feeling like self-inflicted punishment. The reception began with cocktails on the terrace. Natasha positioned herself near the stone balustrade, away from the clusters of guests who knew each other. She sipped her champagne and pretended to admire the view of the river winding through the valley below. Behind her, conversation hummed with gossip and congratulations, none of it directed at her. "Table for one?" a voice asked beside her. The proposition, Natasha turned to find a man standing closer than strangers typically stood, his presence commanding in a way that made the air feel heavier. He was tall, with dark hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and assessing eyes. His suit was impeccably tailored, the kind that whispered of private tailors and generational wealth. But it was his expression that caught her attention, knowing, almost amused, as if he could see straight through her carefully constructed facade. "Excuse me?" she managed, thrown off balance by his directness. "You've been standing alone for 20 minutes, nursing the same glass of champagne," he observed, his voice smooth and cultured. "Either you're waiting for someone who isn't coming, or you're contemplating a dramatic early exit. I'm betting on the latter." Heat crept up Natasha's neck. "And you've been watching me for 20 minutes? That's not creepy at all." His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Julian Cross, and I haven't been watching you specifically. I've been watching everyone. It's a habit." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she shook it. His grip was firm, his palm warm. "Natasha Reed," she said, then immediately wondered why she'd given her full name to a stranger. "I know who you are," Julian said, releasing her hand. "You're the ex-fiancé, the uninvited guest who was invited anyway. The cautionary tale sitting at table 18 with the relatives Brandon hopes will leave early." Natasha's face flamed. If you're here to gloat on his behalf, I'm here because Brandon Pierce is laundering money through his investment firm, and you're about to become his scapegoat." Julian's tone remained conversational, as if discussing the weather rather than criminal conspiracy. The terrace seemed to tilt beneath Natasha's feet. "That's insane. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" Julian moved fractionally closer, his voice dropping. "Tell me, during your engagement, did Brandon ever ask for your banking information? Maybe needed to add you as a beneficiary on certain accounts? Perhaps borrowed your laptop occasionally for urgent work emails?" Natasha's blood turned cold. Brandon had asked for those things. She'd given them willingly, trusting him completely. At the time, it had seemed like the natural intermingling of lives that came with planning a future together. "I see from your expression that I'm right," Julian continued, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "For the past 18 months, your digital signature has been appearing on documents you never signed, transfers you never authorized, emails you never sent. Brandon's been building a comprehensive trail that leads straight to you, establishing you as the mastermind while he plays the unwitting accomplice who trusted the wrong woman." "Why would he do that?" Natasha whispered, though pieces were already clicking into place with sickening clarity. The way he'd insisted on keeping separate finances, his sudden interest in her work computer, the locked drawer in his home office he'd never let her access. "Insurance," Julian said simply. "When people like me come looking for our money, he needs someone to blame. A bitter ex-fiancé with accounting access makes a perfect villain." He paused, letting that sink in. "I'm offering you protection, Natasha, but I need something in return." "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "Really?" "Someone with resources Brandon wishes he'd never borrowed from." Julian's smile was cold now, predatory. "Someone who doesn't appreciate being stolen from, and someone who finds it distasteful when innocent people get dragged into situations they didn't create." Across the terrace, Brandon appeared with Tiffany on his arm, both glowing with newlywed bliss. When his gaze landed on Natasha, something flickered in his expression, not guilt, but calculation. He whispered something to his bride and began moving in their direction. "He's coming over here," Julian murmured. "So here's my proposition. For tonight, you're with me. Let him see you've moved on spectacularly. Tomorrow, we discuss how to keep you out of prison and him in it. Do we have an agreement?" Natasha's mind raced. Every instinct screamed that Julian Cross was dangerous, that getting involved with him would drag her deeper into whatever darkness surrounded Brandon's crimes. But the alternative, becoming the fall guy for financial fraud she didn't commit, was worse. "Yes," she heard herself say. Julian's hand found the small of her back, possessive and warm through the thin fabric of her dress. "Good girl. Now smile like you're exactly where you want to be." The dangerous game Brandon reached them with Tiffany clinging to his arm like an expensive accessory. His smile was bright and hollow, the kind he'd perfected for client meetings. "Natasha, I'm so glad you could make it," he said, though his eyes were fixed on Julian with poorly concealed unease. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Brandon Pierce." "Julian Cross," he replied without extending his hand, the subtle dismissal unmistakable. His fingers splayed possessively across Natasha's back. "Congratulations on your marriage. Natasha's told me so much about you." The lie hung in the air, reshaping reality. Tiffany's perfect smile faltered as she looked between them, registering the intimacy of Julian's touch. Brandon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "How did you two meet?" Brandon asked, his tone casual but his body language rigid. "At a charity gala last month," Natasha improvised, surprised by how easily the fiction flowed. "Julian bid on a dinner package I'd donated through work. We've been inseparable since." She leaned slightly into Julian's solid warmth, selling the performance. "How lovely," Tiffany said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "Brandon never mentioned you were seeing someone, Natasha." "Brandon and I don't really talk anymore," Natasha replied smoothly. "We've both moved on to better things." The barb landed. Brandon's face tightened, and for a moment, Natasha saw something ugly flash across his features before he masked it. "Well, we should make the rounds. Enjoy the reception." He steered Tiffany away with barely concealed irritation. That was convincing, Julian murmured once they were alone. You're a better actress than I expected. I'm a marketing executive. Half my job is selling stories people want to believe. Natasha stepped away from his touch, suddenly needing space. Now tell me everything. If I'm risking my life, I deserve the full truth. Julian glanced around the terrace, then gestured toward the gardens. Not here. Too many ears. They descended the stone steps into the manicured grounds, where paper lanterns cast soft pools of light among the rose bushes. The sounds of the reception faded to a pleasant murmur. Julian led her to a wrought iron bench tucked beneath a flowering arbor, far from prying eyes and listening ears. Brandon's firm manages portfolios for several high-net-worth clients, Julian began, settling beside her. 3 months ago, he approached one of my associates with an investment opportunity. He was moving money for me, legitimately at first. Then he started skimming, small amounts initially, enough to test if I'd notice. When I didn't react immediately, he got bolder. How much are we talking about? Natasha asked, her accounting mind already calculating risk factors. 2.3 million over 12 weeks. Julian's voice was eerily calm. But here's what makes it interesting. Brandon isn't smart enough to pull this off alone. Someone's coaching him, providing sophisticated laundering techniques and digital forgery tools. Your name appears on transactions dated during your relationship, when he had access to your personal information. Natasha felt sick. Show me. Julian produced a slim tablet from inside his jacket, pulling up financial documents that made her blood run cold. There was her signature on offshore account applications she'd never seen. Email exchanges discussing wire transfers, all apparently sent from her work address. Even photographs of documents that looked like they'd been scanned from her home office. This is impossible, she breathed. I would never... I know, Julian said quietly. The metadata doesn't match your actual digital footprint. Different typing patterns, wrong time zones, IP addresses that trace to locations you've never visited. It's a good frame job, but not perfect. That's why I need you. Need me for what? To help me identify who's really behind this. Brandon's records, his communications, his patterns. You knew him intimately. You'll recognize things my investigators might miss. Julian's dark eyes held hers. And in exchange, I'll make sure you're protected when this all comes crashing down. A burst of laughter from the terrace reminded Natasha where they were. At her ex-fiancé's wedding, plotting with a man who admitted to running criminal enterprises. The absurdity should have sent her running. Instead, she found herself nodding. What do we do first? Julian's smile was razor-sharp. First, we make sure Brandon believes we're together. Real enough that he gets nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. He stood, offering his hand. Dance with me. Let him watch. They returned to the reception where the band was playing something slow and sultry. Julian pulled her onto the dance floor with confidence that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times. His hand settled at her waist, the other clasping hers as they moved together with unexpected synchronicity. You're good at this, Natasha observed, hyper-aware of how close he held her. I'm good at many things, Julian replied, his breath warm against her temple, including reading people. You're terrified right now, but you're also exhilarated. You've spent your whole life being cautious, playing by rules that didn't protect you when it mattered. Part of you wants to burn it all down. He was right, and that frightened her more than anything else. Across the dance floor, Brandon stood with a champagne flute in hand, watching them with an expression that confirmed every word Julian had spoken. Whatever game was being played here, Natasha was no longer a pawn. She was a player. And for the first time in months, she felt powerful.